of structural requirements. One of them is to do the recorded stakeholder meetings. So I'm not usually try to present in any room other than this room when I'm talking to a group like this, but here we are. So we've got a couple of sort of brief presentations. I'm going to go through sort of a macro level overview. A lot of you have probably seen some of the content. We won't dwell on it, but just to give you a broad brush idea of what the town's working on, specifically in our commercial districts. Then we're going to go into a little bit more detail on the zoning. But just to start off with timeline-wise, what we're looking at, basically we have a contract with a consultant to do the majority or lion's share of the zoning work. It's a form-based zoning, so it's a little bit intensive. And that contract's ends around the end of the month. So what we're trying to do as a town is basically get the sort of, the breadth, the overall scope of that zoning document in place. Our intent is then to take a couple months later, kind of through June, to really work with individual property owners or individual stakeholders to say, hey, what in here works, doesn't work, how can we maybe make some improvements or embellishments. But I think you'll get a little sense for what it is we're doing in a minute here. To begin with, the town of Amherst, we have been working on an aggressive planning agenda. I think I could say that. Kim Appleman, by the way, is from our planning department. The planning department likes to roll their eyes when I say an aggressive planning agenda. It really is. And when we do that, we try to keep in mind exactly what the town means to the region and what the town's overall standing is. Upstate, if you think about populations in upstate New York, west of the Hudson, right? Of course, you think about Buffalo and Rochester and Syracuse, but just behind Syracuse is the town of Amherst. We're the largest town upstate. We're one of the largest population centers upstate, bigger than the city of Albany. When you think about property value, we actually have the highest gross assessed property value of any of these communities. So we're a big regional and statewide economic engine. And, we've got 126,000 people, 23 public schools. We operate with a $127 million budget. Our population, as big as it is, actually increases during the daytime. We import more people than we export. So we're an alive, thriving economy. And as we move forward, we need to start targeting future generations, right? What worked well to attract baby boomers and Generation X is very different from what attracts millennials and Generation Z. This kind of crowd that's currently, in K through 12 education through college, they're more tech literate, tech savvy. They need less office time. They spend, they're far more concentrated on integration of tech. And so we've had to find prescriptions to start to tweak the way Amherst is sort of put together. And when we do that, we start to look at, I use Retrofitting Suburbia as my secular Bible. That's the book that I kind of recommend. It's about incremental change in how a community can go from being the, sort of auto-centric, sort of suburb to a more urban-friendly environment with more mixed use and more dynamic settings. So as we put together plans over the next couple of years, we're working on a comprehensive plan with UBRI as the leader, as our lead consultant ultimately. But we have all of these little satellite plans that are informing that comprehensive plan. And amongst those, is an effort to basically look at this town, sort of split into 6 economic regions, and focus on what we need to get out of each one of those areas. What we need as a town to have change in those areas. What we need is a town to have increase or decrease in those areas. And what we've tried to do is focus on nodes of economic impact. So within each one of those larger town regions, there's areas of concentration where we really have to focus a lot of our town planning efforts. So I mentioned the town's planning calendar. It's robust through 2019. There's a lot of projects on the schedule. We're here today to talk about Imagine Amherst, which was a project that was started by my predecessors a couple years back, that we're trying to kind of harness and bring into some kind of finalization and completion. But we have projects going on throughout the town. Some of those projects include, as I mentioned before, this Imagine Amherst project, which really sought to take big box retail and commercial zoning and turn it into a mixed use product, right? Turn it into destination areas, places that people would feel more comfortable walking, places where people would feel more comfortable, participating in, places that are set up for the new economy, different types of offices, different types of retail environments. Basically trying to take, sites that look like this, and transform them into something more robust. Other areas that are being planned for that have significant interaction with this zoning change that we're talking about today include Niagara Falls Boulevard. The boulevard, as most of you know, the northern portion of Boulevard is sort of this auto dystopia, right? It's 1,500 accidents in 5 years. It's 34 pedestrians hit by vehicles during that time. The story about the boulevard needs to start to change. And as we look at Willow Ridge and as we look at Green Acres and Town of Tonawanda and try to strengthen those communities, there's an interest in trying to put parts of the boulevard back together as a walkable main street. Right now, the state treats it like more than an arterial, it treats it like a freeway, basically. So as the state starts to scale back the road, road geometries, we need to change our zoning to go along with it. The second real obvious area for needing change through the zoning is in the opportunity zone. So I know a lot of you probably know a little bit about the opportunity zone or a lot about the opportunity zone. If you come away today having questions about the opportunity zone, Maggie Winship, who does all of our economic development work out of my office, or Dave Manjoya from the IDA, would probably love to talk to you a little bit about this. The opportunity zone is a federal opportunity zone under federal tax law, and it's a triangle. It's the 290, it's Sheridan Drive, and Niagara Falls Boulevard. What an opportunity zone means, it's a qualified census tract. It's an area that basically under federal opportunity zone law, an entity can invest in through an opportunity fund and shelter capital gains. So it's a tax incentive. For us, it's more than that. A lot of the areas that we know need to be revitalized in the town lie within this opportunity zone. So we've committed to working through, over the next 6 months, a plan for infrastructure, right? Areas like Ridge Lee campus, areas like the Boulevard Mall. We're going to plan infrastructure. We're going to know what it is we need to do in terms of downstream sewer so that we can not badger good development with downstream sewer analysis till we're blue in the face. Be able to assess impact fees, be able to work with the IDA on run-ups to potential PIFs and tax abatement scenarios. We're going to get this zoning in place, so there'll be of right zoning. And then the next layer is we're going to produce a GIS so when we do the GIS, a draft environmental impact statement, it'll basically mean that investors in this opportunity zone are going to be able to come in and use short form seeker. We're trying to make this as close to shovel ready retrofit as there is in Western New York. as we work on those issues, we have this type of building product in mind, right? We're looking for higher density mixed use. We've heard about, light rail coming down the boulevard and down Maple, and the NFTA, Darren and GBNRTC are here with Hal, and we've been trying to be good stewards of that project. We haven't put all of our eggs in that basket, but we are basically looking at transit-oriented development in places like the old Ridgely UB Annex, in places where we can get retrofits because we can reduce parking demand. At the mall site, which is auctioning April 1st through 3rd, in other plazas and other locations within that district, we want to make sure that we're ready as a town to work with the development community to produce a good product. So, if rail comes, obviously this becomes a really high demand area. The next area that really makes sense for this type of retrofit is an area we're talking about as a tech corridor. And this is sort of the southern edge of the town of Amherst, coming up from the university's South Campus. We've been working with City of Buffalo and town of Tonawanda on some joint planning efforts with the idea that, look, we've got areas here that are older constructions that we want to see reinvestment in. Places like the old KeyBank building at Main and Eggert, but also, some of the other smaller, sites throughout the area, places ripe for reinvestment. And the products we're looking for are co-op offices, that sort of new casual office space, live-work environments, things that respond to the new economy. Our goal in this area is to integrate students, right? So I talk about integrating students, and people roll their eyes sometimes. I swear, if Chapel Hill and Austin can do it, then and have students integrate as part of the professional work environment, that we can do it here at Amherst. So I'm going to move over now and talk a little bit more about the technical aspects of the zoning project. So we'll begin with where this project has been. So back in December 2017, the town adopted an amendment to its comprehensive plan that included a map that looks like this, and talked about creating traditional infill, suburban, and retrofit zoning packages. And everything you see kind of in red up there on the screen, those are, for the most part, shopping centers. But our general business areas, those were areas that were targeted for reinvestment. Not for reinvestment, but for rezoning to encourage new investment. And moving forward, the committee has looked at some of the areas that were red, that were kind of thought of as this kind of suburban infill or suburban retrofit, and really sort of kicked it up a notch and said, with this opportunity zone and with the potential for light rail, this is an area we really want to be transit oriented in terms of our design, and in terms of what kind of product we're looking for. So we are working towards a form-based zoning. It'll be very graphic intensive. It should get rid of some of those old use restriction issues that the town's had in the past. We're hoping that we can streamline things a little bit. Basically, what we're looking at are two types of zoning packages. One is an infill kit. It's aimed at traditional neighborhoods, places like Snyder, places like, adjacent to the Village of Williamsville. Then we have a retrofit kit, which we're calling a little more suburban, but it deals with larger parcels. It's connected by high-speed roadways. They tend to be larger blocks. We're missing sort of the walkable, bikeable connections, and we need to increase some place identity. So the two packages are going to look very similar. The traditional districts, or more of that Main Street feel, What we're looking for, there's a sliding scale of densities, but everywhere from 2.5 at its lowest density, 2.5 stories, trying to get basically three inhabitable stories within a building, right? So a dormer third story, all the way through a CRT 5, which is a full 5-story building. And those commodities, we're not going, there's architects in the audience, we're not overkilling it, but we're just trying to set better rules for how we imagine buildings kind of coming in. So we're going to work through, basically a building set or a set of arrangements that try to make things a little bit more pedestrian friendly and walkable, and take away some of the guesswork from for the developers and for their architects. I know this is tiny. We'll get some larger copies distributed. If you didn't sign in, if you sign in or make sure we have your email address, we'll take a copy of the presentation and send a PDF out. But this is sort of what a zoning page would look like. So basically you have, the intent of the zoning. We tell you what the lot sizes are, what the dimensional qualities are. We tell you what the building setbacks are, the parking setbacks, and we try to distribute that graphically as best we can. Ultimately, then we talk about like street frontages and percentage of buildings that we're looking for, in transparency, percentage of buildings that we're looking for in hard surfaces. Some discussion about building material, though that's very generic and light. Ultimately, this is basically kind of building off of, but really going a lot further in terms of being a manageable product from what you may have seen already in the Village of Williamsville's code, right? So that's a hybrid form-based code that's very architectural standard sort of derived. We're pulling that back a little bit and trying to make some of the graphics a little more generic, give everybody a little bit more space to work, but still sort of take out some of the guesswork as to what the town's looking for. The code itself, I mentioned these kind of suburban retrofit districts. There's various frontage areas. We know that. Not every arterial is the same. Sheridan and Maple are very different. Places within, some of the transit road corridors, those places can be very different. So we're trying to basically create a series of frontage types where we address the size of the arterial, the size of the road, and then create a configuration from those. So you'll see graphics, we'll talk about in those districts what it is we're looking for with internal streets. We would like to see streets built to a town, sort of a town specification. Obviously, if we're going to end up owning streets, we want them built to town specifications and town qualities. But we're looking for sidewalks and street trees at a more traditional urbanized street environment. We'll talk a little bit about what the sort of core of the design intents are. Of course, we give setbacks and setback perimeters. We give buffers. They're really very similar to what we currently have in place, but we'll be able to portray those graphically. And those will vary depending on what kind of environment you're working in. So this is an example. I don't know if anybody in here owns property off of Beaumont and Maple. If you do, we're just using this as a hypothetical. But this is an area. Believe me, if Lasertron went away, my kids would be like lined up in my office picketing with their friends. So, but for the sake of an example, we're using this. So this is North Bailey, Maple Road, Meyer, Beaumont. And when we talk about re-envisioning or reinvigorating a bigger space like that, and we're talking about creating and cutting the space into separate blocks, creating, public access points and public right-of-way through there, In a traditional, these are based on a Manhattan block, so they're good-sized blocks. It's amazing when you overlay this stuff how much space we have. Our opportunity zone is bigger than downtown Rochester. So this is something that we're really kind of focused on is, hey, how does this stuff change in the future? So we'll talk about those block environments. There's going to be a green space requirement. What we're looking for, our tree-lined streets and then batched green space inside of these bigger developments so that we can have sort of public amenities or quasi-private public amenities. And then basically what we'll start to do is say, okay, there's some predominance of walkable, pedestrian, residential that you're going to want, and then we're going to want some storefronts. So there's a percentage of how much retail and sort of storefront mix you want, within some of these larger developments. Our hope is that those will be located around some of those green spaces, those public areas, and it will be able to encourage development patterns that look like this, right? A traditional sort of pattern, interior sort of parking areas or opportunities for other private investment. But the reality is what we're trying to do is push the buildings to the outside, to the street faces, create less of those sort of stores surrounding a sea of parking, and instead really kind of internalize the parking and push the store faces out to sidewalks that integrate. So this is the opportunity zone, and it talks a little bit about land use within that opportunity zone. I don't know if somebody here from Northtown by any chance. So it's an interesting issue, right? When you have an auto dealer who lands inside of a density area. So we're going to want to have some conversations and follow-ups. But the idea basically is, there's some wishful thinking stuff, right? We can look at sites like the Ridge Lee campus and the Boulevard Mall and imagine those changing fairly rapidly. And then there's other things that might not change. For instance, the Northtown Center or the Dent Tower. Those aren't items that we would expect to see a lot of change right out of the gate. We're trying to provide a zoning package that accommodates a lot of different types of business use and business function. Ultimately, I think you'll find that's the case. So I just threw a ton of information out there, and we have a lot of specificity that we want to share with people and talk about. So our goal over the next few months is going to be to try to work with everybody who has a stake in this, who has properties that are affected by this, and Maggie and Kim and myself will meet with you and we'll talk about what the concerns are, what the tweaks might be, or hey, maybe the product fits great and we're ready to go. One of the impetuses for trying to get this out there this week and next week, frankly, is the Boulevard Mall auction. We're trying to sort of tell the market that this change is coming, commit to this change, so that the broker's been able to share that information. I think that's fair. Yes? Yeah. My intent was to try to do this a little bit quickly so that we can get into some questions about process. So that so So that is one of the theories we've been working around and working with. Frankly, we've talked about that with L&R, which is the company servicing the mall currently. We haven't had a hey, hold back, don't do that. There are a couple of units, the Dick's Sporting Goods, the Sears, which is kind of, I think it's owned by Sears, but they're in bankruptcy right now. J.C. Penney's owns its own building, and Benderson owns the Macy's. So there are going to have to be some work-throughs and workarounds in order to make stuff like this work. But as you start to see, the Limited and some of those stores, Abercrombie's products pulling out of malls, it becomes pretty obvious that this thing's going to be pretty sparse pretty quick. So, in terms of the mall itself, yeah, that's a good idea. So in terms of the mall itself, I think from a town's perspective, our goal would be to work with the next owner to start to say, okay, we're here as a town. We want to work with you. We know that infrastructure, water comes in from 3 different locations right now from the outside with pretty chintzy lines. That's not going to support redevelopment. We also know that if somebody's going to take, and go through a purchase or an acquisition with this mall, that, they're going to need some sort of path to development, some sort of path to infrastructure in order to basically justify that purchase, the acquisition cost. So if you look at, right, this was, I won't take credit for it. I think this is an NFTA graphic. I always give credit to the governor. It was in 2017, right? So, it's the governor's State of the State 2017, and what you can see back here is this is Macy's, right? So this is the mall. This is just outcropping and outbuilding the parking lot, frankly, as it approaches Niagara Falls Boulevard. So this is to scale. I mean, it's a scaled product. When we look at it, we could see different phasing approaches to this. It doesn't have to be all cut up at once, but certainly just by working in the perimeter and working on the periphery product, there's already opportunities to start doing this. We're all holding our collective breath to see what happens in a couple weeks here, because we're going to want to start working with the development team or company right away to put together a plan. So, any other questions? Yes. No, that's okay. So, yeah, Consumer Square was one of those last vestiges of traditional suburban, development patterns that the town has favored for years. In our conversations with like James and Eric from Benderson, I don't know, had been basically that. Look, a lot of what created Consumer Square, I mean, one was it was at the time the contemporary way of developing a plaza, but two, it was sort of beholden to the town's kind of archaic parking demands. So, in the conversation about retrofitting that plaza, which is doing well and businesses are thriving, the discussion's really been, if the parking demand were lowered, there'd be more of that sort of outbuilding development that you see already kind of occurred. And while it's not perfect, it is starting to echo some more traditional development pattern. So, that they seem willing to work with us and frankly, from their prompting to create some more of that sort of streetscape aspect. But yeah, that is sort of the last sort of.
There's new stores going in there.
Mm-hmm.
There's adherence to some of the landscaping requirements.
Yep.
There's some good things about
And they've taken it a little bit further and added some public amenities and public spaces internally now. So it's going in the right direction. We still have to, like I said, we as a town, by coming through with the zoning, being able to retrofit some of the parking requirements, get rid of some of our the sort of archaic nature of forcing people into the parking arrangements we have. We hope that we can see some change there. But the other thing, frankly, is that as that becomes more of a facility supporting a higher density development to its east at the Ridge Lee campus, there will be more demand for that type of foot traffic and pedestrian accommodation. Maggie.
So Supervisor mentioned the opportunity zone I asked that we're working on. And once we get through that, we're working with the AIDA very closely. We're on setting a pilot as well for the opportunity zone. And that's, if it's healthy, and we know full rights where that retail is, that's very healthy. But if we can incentivize more things to density housing, that's really where
And if you represent or own properties in that opportunity zone, we definitely want to come and talk with you, because this is a great chance to really couple some local and federal incentives to do some forward thinking stuff, right? So it's going to be a rare opportunity where the town's going to do a GIS out ahead of everybody and be able to come back and use short form seeker and have the zoning of right and have all these stars aligning. So definitely, we definitely want to schedule a meeting. We definitely want to talk about the products and what we're trying to do. Dave.
Yeah, as Brian said, clock's ticking and we're obviously going to have something in place to talk about incentives to help your investment. The time is really this year. It's a program. You have to start building in order to really maximize the shelter's benefits.
Any other questions? Leanne?
Speaking slightly different, do you anticipate with this code any changes in process, streamlining, or designs that?
Yes. So one of the conundrums we get into with the town is the town's not equipped to deal with architectural language real well. And in the past, the zoning's all come through the building department, and we've separated that. Now the zoning is being handled by the planning department. So if you have up front, we're working on coordinated review process between planning and zoning. Our intent, this will scare everybody at first, but our intent is to create an architectural review board. It is subservient to the planning board, so it's not going to be one of those, hey, we can't get architectural approval for 3 or 4 months. Their intent is to sort of meet, be able to do some. We want to make it a town we want to give the town a little bit better access to sketch review and sketch design review. So right out of the gate, if you're contemplating a project, if you're looking at a project, get you in front of that type of board, that type of group. We have added to the planning department. We have, if you don't know, Brian Andrzejewski, our former building commissioner, is now in the planning department. We brought in Roberta Rapocio recently, a new planner, and we're adding Daniel Latowski from Town Cheektowaga. I don't know if I should have said that on the record or not, because we haven't approved it yet, but Dan's coming in. So we're ramping up to make sure we have more personnel, people who have dealt with more of these subject matter and these issues, so we can help hopefully expedite the front end of these projects. On the back end of the project, now we've pulled zoning out of the building department, so buildings really focused primarily on permitting and inspections. That's allowing them to deal with a little bit faster timeline. We're working very hard to try to keep our commitment of getting to 4-week reviews for shelled spaces. We have our struggles there sometimes, but we want you to be able to fill your lease spaces, get people in right away, get the signs through. Doing a lot right now with coordinated sign review. We want to make sure we're getting product through faster, and we would expect that with the zoning changes coming, that will create a little bit of a hiccup for architecture or projects. So what we're telling you right now is, we're tracking June for those changes. If you've got projects that you have in your pipeline as a company, come talk to us right out of the gate. We'll make sure that what we're working on is in sync with what you're working on, so that we can get these projects moving. And that's townwide. That's not just in Opportunity Zone. We really want to be conducive to business. So we're trying to extricate any old demons of Amherst being unfavorable to businesses that we've had in the past. I think we're getting there. Yes. Well, we've been working with some people. We've identified people. Frankly, we're sticking just to design professionals. So it's not going to be a board of lay people who have to contemplate this. It's very different from like what the village would have, or what a village environment would have. And they're going to be working just on these code items. So within the code language, there'll be some, areas where the architectural review board can, if you got a material that we say isn't really permissible on the ground floor, like an EIFS product or something, then they may, as an architectural review board, may be able to look at your design concept and say, okay, we're going to give you an exemption. So we wanted somebody to be able to weigh that and be able to give an exemption, and not just be hard nose on stuff every time. So that was one of the ways that we realized we could accommodate some of that. Yes. Retail, office, residential, yeah. And look, if what we're hoping to come out of here with, wishful thinking, we're hoping to come out of here with something that approaches sort of like a Harvard Square type model, right? Where there's professional offices, tech offices, whatever kind of, biomedical, groups, we would love to see that blend horizontally and vertically. Sure. That slide? Or this one?
Yeah, so there's different, I think there's different, in the retrofit, there's going to be different kinds of streets, so it's unrealistic to think that everywhere is going to be like 3 miles. So there's all of different places, but there's different kinds of streets that
We're going to be, so what we're doing is we're providing a form in mass, right? We're saying, hey, we want taller ground floors, for buildings. The intent is to try to get, retail ready environments there. But beyond, eliminating some obnoxious uses, we're not trying to regulate use and what goes where here. Our focus is trying to get a form that basically works together. So if somebody came in and said, hey, I've got a vision for this, that has, an oncology suite, and in a micro hotel, fine, figure out. Well, that if you can make it fit the forms, then that's what we're after. And I realize that, the nature of development is, changes, now seemingly every 4 to 5 weeks, right? You see a different product out there. If you read ULI literature or something, it's amazing to see exactly what comes spinning out of some of these places. So what we're trying to do is create a flexibility, and basically say we want a traditional format, but we want, a mix of uses that's going to be dynamic. Anybody else have any questions? All right, we'll be around for questions, and definitely talk to Maggie or Kim or myself. If you want to get something scheduled, your probably best bet would be to talk to Maggie or Kim. But we can get something scheduled and set up, and I do want to be part of meetings and discussions. So we'll distribute the 2 PowerPoints via PDF. And then as you develop more questions, we'll start to share more and more information. So. That's what happens when you get NYSERDA backing a zoning grant. So, all right, thank you all.